Hi all, and welcome to the China EVs and More Clubhouse Room, where my co-host Lei Xing and I will go over some of the week's most important news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors that will have effects on the global auto markets. We'll also open up the room for the final 15 to 20 minutes for anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. So please raise your hand early if there's something you want to say. One rule: we appreciate vigorous debate, but let's all be considerate and respectful to each other. Briefly, what Lei and I discuss over the next hour and a half or so is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. Even if it sounds like investment advice, it isn't. We encourage those who enjoy this room to please follow us on Clubhouse, promote this room to your friends, and of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li, and I'm the founder and managing director at Sino Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull some of our discussion topics from, although for those who tuned in on Wednesday, this is going to be recap number 2, focused on the China OEMs and EV startups. You can sign up for my newsletter at sinoautoinsights.com, which I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, good evening from my side. I am the former chief editor of China Auto Review. I've covered the industry on the ground for the past 20 years. I'm now here in the US, working as an independent analyst and consultant. So we talked about the foreign brands just yesterday for the Shanghai Auto Show.
36 hours ago.
And we're
35 hours ago.
Yeah, 36 hours ago. So we're now going into the Chinese and the tech brands, which I feel people are more interested in based on our last Clubhouse. So just start off, too. You were there. Just talk about some of the impressions on the Chinese and tech brands. What stood out?
So, I've been to probably 6 or 7 of the last auto shows, probably 2-to-1 ratio on Beijing to Shanghai because I live in Beijing. And Beijing is always a bit more subdued than Shanghai just because Shanghai is just more generally a flashier city. And so I did see a ton more flash coming from the Chinese automakers. And in the past, you would see smaller booths from the Chinese automakers even before the Chinese EV startups, right? But now NIO commands, a corner booth, and Zeekr commanded a huge booth in Lynk & Co. And so, there was a ton of excitement from all these EV makers, and there wasn't any real acknowledgement of internal combustion engine vehicles, number one, and then number two, stuffed in between all these SOEs with these new brands, ArcFox series, things like that. There were Huawei, there was, Baidu, that was also getting a lot of attention. I was reading and actually kind of thinking back through the 2 days I was there, the booths that had the most foot traffic based on the halls that were the most popular were Huawei, had a ton of foot traffic, and BYD had a ton of foot traffic, and NIO had a ton of foot traffic. So, those 3 companies were getting a lot of attention. And so, maybe we can start off with what you think about XPeng's P5. I took a look at it, and, it's an inoffensive vehicle. I think it reminds me a bit of a fleet vehicle. I've mentioned this before, but I think it could sell quite a bit. And I think that with the P5, if we think it's going to come in at under 200,000 RMB, which is around $30,000 or $32,000 US, and it comes standard, at least some of the higher end versions come standard with LiDAR, they're really, really pushing the envelope with what you can get at an affordable price point. And there are other automakers, Chinese automakers, that are also offering LiDAR. But I think the combination of XPeng doing that autonomous drive from Guangzhou to Beijing prior to the auto show, and then introducing the P5, and then also having a drone at their booth. They're just really trying to become or position themselves as the most technologically advanced smart EV maker in the world. So what do you think?
Well, if you remember some of the audience who attended our Clubhouse room before, in our last episode, not the one yesterday, but on the 15th, the day before that, Expo already held the event, right, unveiling the P5. So I think we talked a lot about the P5, and since then, they started, taking orders. And yesterday they announced that they received 10,000 orders in, 3 or 4 days. But the interesting thing, I think, is they did not unveil the pricing, which they said they were going to announce the pre-sale pricing when they did the global debut on the 14th. So I think it might have to do with all these other brands suddenly coming out with LiDAR.
You think they're sharpening their pencil?
I think in some sense they are, and Baidu came out with a counterattack with their vision-based AMP, city autonomous driving solution.
That doesn't use LiDAR. That doesn't use LiDAR, right. And then there was some issues with Huawei's viral video. A lot of people are saying that they've trained that same route over and over again, and they use that same route to do the demonstration. So now we're having all these, not conspiracy theory, but jostling, right? It's fighting different. It's a technology pissing contest, right? It's like, okay.
Yeah, but I mean, for the P5, yeah, I still think this is going to be a car they're going to try to price it in the 200,000 range with the LiDAR. And it's only using 2 LiDARs, whereas the ArcFox uses 3. And I guess what Baidu seems to be taking a shot at is that they announced that the Auto Shanghai, they've done, 10 million kilometers of L4 autonomous driving, right? They've done, billions of kilometers of virtual simulated autonomous driving.
Right.
So you can see sort of this fighting going on. Say, hey, I'm more credible, or you're more credible.
Well, and part of that jostling is they are talking, I forget, I think it was the Baidu representative saying that L4 actually should mean that there is no safety driver. So now they're trying to redefine to their own benefit what L3, L4 means, right? And at the end of the day, we can't use L4 on the roads anyways, legally at least. And so we can argue who has a better system, or we can try to listen to them or understand why they feel they have a better system. But at the end of the day, we're not going to have L4 for quite some time. There are pilots that are in the United States and California in particular, in some parts of China, that have removed the safety driver, I think in Beijing and in Shanghai with Baidu and AutoX and a couple others. But now it's a big jumbled mess as to who's better and who's not. And then if the argument is we have a better autonomous driving system, and for those that have been following for quite some time, data is the oil that gets that system going, and the more oil, the more refined the system is, then how can they say they have the best system if they don't have any data or not a lot of data? So again, this is more marketing doublespeak to me than anything else, but it's a way they're going to differentiate themselves or try to differentiate themselves, right?
Yeah, and that would be Baidu's argument regarding data, and same for Didi's argument. So you mentioned L4, and there was recent, also somebody said this, that really these city autonomous driving, going back to the P5, that's one of their biggest selling points, is that being able to bring the NGP highway and expressway and city highway function into the city driving condition. But now you have other players that are trying to do that as well, right? Baidu and Huawei with ArcFox. But at the end of the day, it still requires the driver to be fully monitoring the road.
Yes.
This is also what's going on with the Tesla's FSD, right? You have to be, it's not like you can take your eyes off and do other things. That is the current SAE definition, right? That the simple definition, right, is eyes off. That will get into L3. But now what's happening is, fine, you can have these city autonomous driving conditions. You can have the car drive itself, take your unprotected left turns. But the human driver sitting in the driver's seat is watching all of this. So what do you call that? Is that L2, is that L3, or is that L4, right? This is getting so blurred. That's why there's some other arguments saying that SAE, the level differentiation, it doesn't work anymore because it's so blurred, and the industry using L2.5, L2 plus. Even the big tier 1 suppliers are using that. So but having said that, I think that's the race that we're in, is to be able to do autonomous things in city driving conditions.
The other good thing, though, too, is that we're actually getting more granular. So they're calling out specific use cases, right? And, we had advocated, or we discussed, in episode 1, episode 2, and I've been kind of preaching this for a couple of years now, that commercialization of autonomous driving. And, to your point about these definitions and these words and these descriptions, there's an argument that autonomous driving should be changed to assisted driving, right? Because it shouldn't be self-driving. It should be assisted driving because you're still an active participant. There's a requirement that you're an active participant. But at least we're getting into these scenarios where it's not a blanket statement. Even Tesla is getting much more careful about that, right? So whether it's highway driving, whether it's city-to-city driving, whether it's driving in a traffic jam, we're seeing that these autonomous systems will likely be able to be activated in only specific situations. And I think it will evolve into specific cities and specific areas as well, where the capabilities will be geofenced based on, if you're downtown Beijing, maybe not, but if you're on the outskirts of Beijing, past Fifth Ring Road, the geofencing will open up and allow you to use certain use cases for these assisted or autonomous driving, at least on the level 3 and level 4 levels. This isn't a discussion about autonomous driving. So let's talk about Hengchi, because one of the other huge stands and booths was Hengchi. And I was there. I looked at every vehicle on stage, and you've been to dozens of auto shows. So when a car looks like a mock-up versus a real thing. Every single one of those cars looked like a mock-up. And I looked at their stock price today. They're trading at $75 billion. The market cap is $75 billion. But they were one of the highest traffic booths in the hall that they were in. So what are you learning about Hengchi and reading about what's going on with them?
Well, Hengchi reminds me of the Chinese brands like Chery, like Geely, when they were early in their days, back in the early maybe 2000s, that all they did was just, put these cars out there. We're gonna have this different branded vehicles in position differently, and just have these different sedans, SUVs, MPVs, just put them out there. I feel like that's what's happening with Hengchi. And then, I tweeted out a video of the group president testing out one of the SUVs, compact SUVs, the Hengchi 5, because the industry consensus, maybe most of the consensus has been that Evergrande definitely doesn't have a money issue. They have loads of money, right? Mm-hmm. The only thing they lack is the car itself. Drivable production is going to go out there on sale. You remember at the end of 2000, now it must have end of 2018, when they signed that huge deal with like 60 suppliers and different
Yes.
industry stakeholders. They had this long table, if you remember. And there were 60 people sitting on that one long table. And then they're working with 15 globally renowned designers. And the chairman had visited in one of his trips prior to the Frankfurt Motor Show in 2019, all the German tier one suppliers. So they have the money, they have the resources, they put these cars together, but I don't know, they have 3 production bases, right?
Well, and you know, they delayed launch now. They've delayed launch now a couple times.
Yep. And they're still sticking with that numbers we talked about. What, 5 million by 2030, I think?
Well, let's talk about 9. So they introduced 14 models. They want to make 9 in the next 2.5 years or something like that. And they just hired, you'd said, what was the ex-Byton founder's name? Or
Daniel Kircher.
Yeah, so he's part of the Hongshi management team now, correct?
He's a EVP.
Yeah, so it's amazing. I think they're $8 billion in. I tweeted a couple days ago. It's, you know, $8 billion in, a bunch of mock-ups and vaporware. So, but if they...
And to tell you the truth, even though they do have these 15 renowned designers, including names like Anders Warming, the BMW, I remember, right? Mm-hmm. These designs are, I don't know, they're just so Shanghai. People might know what that means.
You should explain it to them. You should explain it to them.
Well, Shanghai is a term that's copycat, but I'm using it more as these designs, they don't really, I mean, if you look at the ET7, right? The Neo ET7 or even the Ford Evos we talked about, and you compare those with the Hongshi cars, they seem to be from the early 2000s or the late 90s styling. Maybe there's just so many of them. If they had come out with just 1 or 2, it might have been better.
And that's what I alluded to in my newsletter, right? Because you say Shanghai, I say Frankenstein. They Frankenstein these design elements from all these different cars and put them together to create a group of SUVs, a group of small, large, and medium-sized sedans. And so it's amazing what they've been able to do, at least the illusion of what they've been able to do in the last couple of years. But I'm still skeptical. The one thing that's going to be crazy is if they actually get a few of these cars on the road, it could really, really throw a stink bomb into the sector and, you know, get people scrambling or get companies scrambling. So
they're supposed to start production of 1 or 2 of the model lineup later this year, starting mass quantity production early next year, with deliveries coming after that. So we'll see. It seems that, and also the Daniel Kircher, I mean, he's a sales marketing guy. Mm-hmm. When he was at BMW, the joint venture, and also Infiniti, all he did was come out with these new sales and marketing schemes that help the brand grow. But I don't know. I'm skeptical as well. So, but we'll see.
So let's move on to Geely and the Velocicopter. Is it, how do you say it? Velocopter and the Zeekr and Lynk & Co. You know I actually really thought the 001 was a very nice vehicle. How it was designed. I didn't mind the matte painting. It was very aggressive, but I have more issues or kind of lack of understanding of their branding strategy and kind of overall company strategy. But the Zeekr seems like it's ready to go to production, I think, very soon. I think they've been working on it behind the scenes for quite some time. Yeah, I'm more wondering about their overall strategy than for the Zeekr 001 and succeeding. I think that's going to do fine. What's your take?
I generally like the shooting brake styling. I don't like SUVs, to tell you the truth. So really the Citroen C5X...
You're living in the wrong country, man.
I don't really like SUVs. tell you the truth. I'm a wagon guy. That's why I like shooting brakes.
Oh, I love the R6 wagon. So
yeah, I think the 001 is nicely done. They're marketing as a performance shooting brake, right?
yes.
A mass market performance shooting brake. I think the delivery starts in September. So
Yeah.
I think
they're really building
well.
prototypes and pilots.
The thing about Geely I'm more worried is actually the Polestar and the Volvo cars. Actually, I am more worried about these brands. The Geometry, the first lower tier brand, I think most likely will get merged into the Zeekr brand, because Zeekr will be Geely's Neo. It will be Geely's Xpeng. It will be Geely's. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
That's their brand and name to compete with even the luxury brands and the smart EV startups. So Zeekr is Geely's own smart EV startup. But they have the resources, right? They're using the SEA platform production-wise. But what's going to happen, like we talked about this, the Zeekr being such a high-end performance brand, and where does Polestar go? And Volvo cars, by the way, they're now working with Didi, because Didi used to work with Uber, remember?
Yep.
With their XC90s. Since Uber is now not doing autonomous driving, I think Didi, right? They announced the Gemini hardware platform to be used on the Volvo cars.
So currently, and correct me if I'm wrong, Volvo has been hitting it out of the ballpark from a sales standpoint over the last few years. Polestar, because Volvo has recently come out with a couple of plug-in battery electric vehicles themselves, and so there's confusion, I believe, in the market that, okay, if Polestar and Volvo aren't the same, then what are they? And Polestar is just struggling mightily to gain any traction in the Chinese market. I was told, and this is a rumor, that they had sold in January and February 60 units of the Polestar 2 in China, which is absolutely horrendous. And it would be, if I'm Polestar management, I'm pressing the panic button with a quickness on that stuff.
Well, they recently changed the China CEO, China president.
Yeah. But it'll be interesting, because the other thing about Geely is that they also have those technology partnerships too. So, we can talk about that some other time. But
and then just to add, Geely also came out with that big SUV, Xingyue L.
Mm-hmm.
I like it, even though I said I don't like SUVs, but I think it's nicely done. I guess it's one of the mid-size SUV we also talked about in our previous episode. That will really be a new segment that has been dominated by the Toyota Highlander for years. Yes. Now you see this is Geely's entry into that segment. And the large SUVs, the Chinese brands somehow haven't done really well. So we'll see how the Xingyue L does, but it looks nice.
Okay, let's talk Great Wall tank. I went to the booth. There was right before a media event, and there was about 95% male between the ages of 27 and 40 years old. They're all wearing these tank t-shirts, Tank 300. And I think so if I'm not mistaken, the Tank 300 was actually a Great Wall vehicle or a Haval vehicle that they turned into an entire brand. And so they had a Tank 700, they have a Tank 600, and it's almost a combination of Jeep and Hummer. The Frankenstein, the Jeep kind of aesthetic.
And Mercedes.
Yeah, okay. They do have a high-end Bentley Bentayga had a baby with a Lincoln Navigator with the two-tone paint on the stage. So they did have one of those high-end vehicles. But I think, Chinese consumers, especially that target market that they're trying to hit, love SUVs, right? And they're very passionate about it. And so do you think there's a decent chance for Tank to do well in China?
Yeah, well, Tank came out of the Way brand, which
right?
is positioned as a Chinese premium SUV brand that Great Wall launched about the same time as the Lincoln Go. So I think similar to Hengchi, Great Wall was one of the Chinese brands that threw out so many different cars out there. And because also they have so many brands, that they now have 5 brands. So they have Haval, they have the Aura is the dedicated EV brand. They have the Way, the new tank brand, and also the Great Wall Motor pickup. And I think aside from all these models, one thing we've been talking more about BYD, right? It's a very vertically integrated manufacturer.
And let me interrupt you 1 second. So for our viewers, Great Wall primarily builds SUVs, and they're one of the 3 what you would call non-SOE Chinese automotive company. They get a ton of support at the provincial level, I believe, just like Geely does in Hangzhou and BYD in Shenzhen, but they are not owned by the Chinese government in any way, shape, or form. So they're one of the 3 independent automotive companies. And again, they primarily build SUVs, which is one of the reasons they are doing well in the market, because Chinese consumers are increasingly buying crossovers and SUVs. So go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so they're basically, just give you a sense, they sold 330,000 vehicles in first quarter. 2/3 of that came from Haval, which is their dedicated SUV brand. So you get a sense of their sales makeup. But yeah, if we talk about NIO, XPeng, Li Auto in the Chinese startup space, then Geely, BYD, Great Wall would be the similar trio in the Chinese private car company space. And Great Wall Motor, they even have had 5 of their supplier subsidiaries exhibiting at the Shanghai Auto Show, right? So one of them is S-Volt, which
that's right.
makes their own battery cells. So watch out, right? And they supposedly came out with a much higher density battery cell. I don't remember the specs, but it's something they launched. And these other suppliers under the Great Wall Motor Group, they produce everything from even lighting. So they're in some way maybe even more integrated than BYD. And I guess the other point is basically the controversial cars that they showed, right? You mentioned the tank and especially the Aura. So the Aura EV brand is actually, they're trying to market it as a brand that's targeted at the female buying group. So they name their cars, Black Cat, White Cat, Good Cat, Lightning Cat, now the Punk Cat, and right?
Well,
and I think,
and they're about to get sued. They're about to get a cease and desist from Volkswagen for that concept.
This is where I'm getting at. The Volkswagen and the Porsches now, I think actually they could care less what the Chinese brands do, because it really doesn't worth the time to just bother with it.
Right.
Just let them do it, but we'll be in our market. And the Lightning Cat is actually it will be a production vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a Porsche Beetle Model 3. Right, but
so we should also mention that Range Rover also has a few admirers, and the G-Wagon has a few admirers, and some Shanghai Chinese brands that have essentially made clones, cheap knockoff versions of those vehicles. And if you're wondering, Great Wall, if you're wondering if Great Wall has any aspirations of going international, they have a huge, I won't say huge, they have a decent sized presence, R&D engineering, in the Metro Detroit area. So they have an office, a technical center, in, I want to say, Ann Arbor. So there's no doubt that they have aspirations to go international in a short period of time. So it's interesting how each of these, since I've been here, in the last 10 years, how they've all really, really evolved and have learned and have improved. So it'll be interesting to see, because I don't know if Western folks really understand how brutal competition in China is. I think there's this stereotype that, it's a communist system, but things happen so fast here. And mostly it's been in the technology space. But now we're seeing it kind of bleed into a mainstream manufacturing with a nice little flavor of technology, right? And then over the next 3, 5, 6 years, it's going to be predominantly technology with a touch of manufacturing. And so it's going to affect global automakers. And I think that's where Western folks will get a much better appreciation of how fast things move and how competitive things are here. I advise any of my clients that are looking at entering the China market, and that's primarily one of the reasons why they contact me, is if you don't have a boatload of cash and a dedicated team and you're prepared to hire boots on the ground, the China market is just going to eat you alive. So let's move on to...
You want to talk about some of the state-owned?
Yeah, let's do that.
Now that we've right? The Voyas, the IMs, the...
Yeah, because this is the thing. You help me with this, explain. So Voya is a new brand that was established 3 years ago by GAC? Dongfeng. And then there's ArcFox, which is associated with BAIC. And there's Series that's associated with Chongqing Motors.
SOCON.
Yes, and so...
Which actually is also involved with Dongfeng.
And I'll make this quick explanation. So my belief is that they created these separate brands in order to make the names more palatable to the Western audience and more Western friendly, because they planned on exporting these cars. So Series used to be SF Motors. And if you look up in Google SF Motors, they claim to be a Silicon Valley based EV startup, but they're clearly associated with SOCON. So let's start with ArcFox.
Maybe the way we can talk about this is the state. When we talk about state-owned companies, there are different types of state-owned companies. There's the centrally administered state-owned companies, and there are only 3 of them: FAW, Dongfeng, and Chang'an. That's 3 of them. And then SAIC, BAIC, GAC, the next ones are actually local state-owned companies. I think that centrally administered, with the exception of Chang'an maybe, the FAW and Dongfeng, their high-end brand, well, obviously Red Flag is doing extremely well, but Dongfeng is the one where I just don't think the way their state-owned company is operated, I don't see this Voya being successful.
In China or globally?
Right. Whereas in China, I'm talking about in China, whereas SAIC is, with their, maybe I'm a bias a little bit, but Shanghai companies seems to be more well managed. So SAIC Motor, especially with the joint ventures with Volkswagen, GM. So I think the IM brand joint venture with Alibaba probably has a better success likelihood than the Voya, just because of the way the companies are structured and the culture.
So the L7 that the IM brand launched earlier this year in January and showed off at the Shanghai Auto Show, they started accepting pre-sales.
400,000 for the Angel Round edition.
Yes, and so there are like lifetime services that you can get for purchasing the Angel Round edition of the L7. And so I think it's a decent looking car, and it's supposed to be delivered in Q1 of 22. So that's actually not a long time away. And it'll be a good indication. And you, again, tell me if I'm wrong. It'll be one of the first cars that is going to have a major technology partner that's co-branding the vehicle. So Alibaba is going to supply Ali Yun and then Ali OS to the vehicle. So we'll see. It's aggressively designed, and it was getting a decent amount of attention just because it's one of the newer brands that I don't think has been in the market for very long. So I think the media were curious to see what's going on with that brand. So there was a decent amount of foot traffic in their booth as well. So
yeah, and this is a model that will be positioned against the NIO ET7 and the Mercedes EQS,
yes,
to be frank,
yeah,
in terms of size. But obviously, Mercedes has the luxury heritage that none of these brands have. And I think the EQS, in China, it will sell.
Well, let me ask you this, and we'll step away from the auto show for a second. Do you think the Chinese consumer is ready to spend 400, 500,000 RMB, 60, 75, $90,000 on a luxury Chinese brand, in volume?
I think NIO has proven that it works, right? Their car's average selling price is above transaction price, is above 400,000 RMB already. So that NIO's shown that it works, that as long as what comes with that price, what you get for that price. And now I think some of these new models, they're just tacking on all these latest technologies, the hardware, but lacking that what NIO has done. A good example is ArcFox. Can Huawei elevate the ArcFox brand, or is the other way around? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think 300,000. Look at the Mach-E, the locally produced Mach-E pricing. It's around 300,000, and I think it's perfect. It's a perfect price positioning. You can't go any lower. You can't go any higher. And this will be the same issue for, I was talking with Will, or maybe, through chatting, that the Cadillac Lyriq is priced at $60,000 US. When that in the Chinese market, how much will it sell, right? This is a very good homework for Cadillac because they've already seen what the Chinese brands can do and how they're going to price their model. So yeah, I think 400,000, 300,000, 400,000. I mean, the Li Auto 1 sells for 330,000.
Well, and you said,
there's only one.
Currently, Hongqi is killing it too, right? So there is room, but I also feel that I have an amended take from where you stand, because the Audis, the BMWs, the luxury market is still growing, and as that matures and customer acquisition costs increase, I think what we'll start to see is Audi, Mercedes, to protect that share of 800,000 units a year that they sell, and with a ton of profitability, they could sharpen their pencils, reduce pricing a bit, put pressure on these newer luxury Chinese automakers. And, but where the Chinese automakers have the advantage is, again, the trend is Chinese consumers are more favorable towards Chinese brands than ever, number one. And then number two, will these luxury car makers, these foreign luxury car makers, whether it's Cadillac, Audi, Mercedes, or BMW, will they get the connected right? Will they get the software right? Because that's the second or third most important aspect of a vehicle for the Chinese consumer. It's not that important, I don't believe, in Europe or the United States yet. So if they're not focusing on that here in China, this is the advantage the Chinese makers have. But, the foreign automakers have the leverage when it comes to the pricing, right? And as a new brand, a new luxury brand, the last thing you want to do is slash pricing, right? But as a foreign automaker who's been in the business for 100 years around the world, reducing pricing, by 10,000 RMB, 20,000 RMB isn't a huge deal in order to protect, number one, the volume that they already sell into the country. So it's going to be, I think, a really, really stiff competition from both sides, talking about jostling and elbowing for room. And the indication will be in 18 months from now is if there's a Chinese luxury maker that actually is in the decision-making process against an Audi, against a BMW, against a Mercedes, versus against other Chinese luxury EV makers, right? So I think that's where we'll see one of these or two of these guys kind of break through, because if they're globally competitive, then there's going to be some fireworks in China. So
yeah, the premium brand EVs, the ABBs, are in a. If I were working for them, I'd be a bit nervous.
Oh, I'd be so nervous.
Especially in the EV space.
I'd be so nervous.
They're going to sell. They're going to sell, right? I said last time that China is going to sell 2.5 million NEVs, but there's still that 10% of the market. There's still 22 million other vehicles that there's such a huge volume of it. So it's like, okay, but then again, they are also pressured by this dual credit thing. If they can't sell, then right, Volkswagen is buying credits from Tesla.
Yeah.
Right. So this is a very tough.
And this is where I'm going to be tough on some of these foreign brands, right? Because in the last 30 years, 35 years, they've slapped their logo on vehicles here and sold them at no problem. Now the market is maturing. It's tightening. We're not going to see double-digit growth anymore. So the inefficiencies will start to emerge because, again, customer acquisition costs will increase. And these Chinese players, they're nipping on their heels because the products are much better than they were 10 years ago. And they can connect directly with the consumer. I'll give you, for instance, if Audi is still designing most of their hardware software stack in Germany and then importing it into China and then carving out, the mapping system, the cloud system, the user experience is going to be completely different. And it's probably not going to be as competitive as a Chinese manufacturer where their software they've used a partner for is designed natively for the system here. So I think we shouldn't underestimate that part of it, right? Because Audi makes beautiful cars. Porsche makes beautiful cars, but 5 or 7 years from now, is the exterior design going to really matter as much? I'm speculating that it's not. And so if today is an indication and the auto show is an indication, everything's going to be a touchscreen, right? And so guess what? All these knobs and buttons that look really cool in Audi interiors and Porsche interiors and Mercedes interiors, they're going to be gone. And so how does the screen work? How does the screen work with my Huawei phone? How does the screen work with, WeChat? That's going to be so important in the next 3 or 4 years because you need to get those bugs out quick. Otherwise, you're just going to get flamed in social media.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.